As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
More than 400 U.S. officials from 40 government agencies have sent a letter to President Biden criticizing his unconditional support for Israel's war in Gaza. And this is the latest example of dissent from within the U.S. government over this policy of backing this brutal onslaught in Gaza. So this letter reads, quote, "We call on President Biden to urgently demand a ceasefire and to call for de-escalation of the current conflict by securing the immediate release of the Israeli hostages and arbitrarily detained Palestinians, the restoration of water, fuel, electricity, and other basic services, and the passage of adequate humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip," end quote. So two members of the Israeli Knesset, that's their parliament, wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal arguing for Western countries to take in refugees from Gaza as Israeli officials continue to call for Palestinians to be pushed out of the territory. So this op-ed was written by Danny Danon, who's a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, and Ram Ben Barak, a member of the opposition party Yesh Atid, which is led by former Prime Minister Yair Lapid. So the ruling party and the main opposition party unite to tell Europe and the U.S. to take in Palestinian refugees. They wrote, quote, "One idea is for countries around the world to accept limited numbers of Gazan families who have expressed a desire to relocate," end quote. And they listed examples of conflicts where Europe and the U.S. accepted refugees, including the wars in former Yugoslavia and Syria. They said, quote, "Looking to these examples, countries around the world should offer a haven for Gaza residents who seek relocation," end quote. They concluded the op-ed by saying that the international community has a moral imperative to accept refugees from Gaza, as Israel is killing all of these Palestinian children. They're saying this. So this op-ed drew praise from Bezalel Smotrich, and he is an extremist settler who is in Netanyahu's government. He leads the religious Zionist party, and he is Israel's finance minister, and he also has a lot of control now over settlements, expanding settlements in the West Bank. He said, quote, "I welcome the initiative of members of Knesset, Ram Ben Barak and Danny Danon on the voluntary immigration of Gaza Arabs to the countries of the world. This is the right humanitarian solution for the residents of Gaza and the entire region," end quote. So Smotrich said that other countries accepting refugees from Gaza is the only solution that will bring an end to the suffering. He added, quote, "The state of Israel will no longer be able to put up with the existence of an independent entity in Gaza," end quote. So it's very clear that the name of the game for these members of this Netanyahu government and many members of the Israeli parliament is to push all these Palestinians out of Gaza and take over the territory. It's clearly what they want to do. So expectations are low for the meeting between President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping that will take place on Wednesday in San Francisco during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. That's the APEC summit. The New York Times reported Tuesday that Biden officials have said one potential agreement that might be made is to resume military-to-military communication channels that were suspended in the wake of then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's provocative trip to Taiwan in August 2022. But even the increase in military dialogue is not guaranteed. The U.S. has previously framed its efforts to restore the communication channels as guardrails to manage the frequent encounters between the two militaries in the South China Sea and near Taiwan. From China's perspective, the U.S. effort to establish these guardrails will normalize the increasing U.S. military presence in the region. So the South China Morning Post reported that when China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, visited Washington last week, he scoffed when asked about military-to-military guardrails, saying that the best guardrail would be the U.S. adhering to the historical commitments that it made regarding Taiwan. In recent years, the U.S. has significantly increased military and diplomatic support for Taiwan, including providing military aid this year for the first time since the U.S. severed relations with Taiwan to formally establish ties with China, which officially happened in 1979. And then Kurt Campbell, who is the top Asia official on the National Security Council, and he's actually the nominee now to be Deputy Secretary of State. He's a real China hawk. He started what they called the Asia pivot during the Obama administration, and he had a quote, saying what he wants Biden to say in this summit. He said that the best thing for the U.S. to do is to, quote, "make it clear and to demonstrate to the Chinese that we still have staying power, that we are still the most powerful country and we are still committed to our larger purpose in the Indo-Pacific, end quote. So that's the message he wants Biden to deliver to Xi Jinping. And China views all the U.S. efforts of building up its military, building up its alliances in the Asia-Pacific as containment aimed at China. And Xi Jinping has made that very clear in comments earlier this year. He said, quote, Western countries led by the U.S. have implemented comprehensive containment, encirclement, and suppression against us, bringing unprecedented severe challenges to our country's development, end quote. And those comments were significant because before that, he would only kind of vaguely reference the U.S. and not name them directly when he said things like that. But there he kind of called it out.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries followed Johnson at the podium and expressed his support for President Joe Biden's joint financial aid packages that would support both Israel and Ukraine. Aid packages? Fucking more weapons of death. And that cocksucker, Johnson, he calls him I'm a devout Christian. What Christ are you talking about? What Christ are you talking about? That wouldn't want to ceasefire and want to keep slaughtering people. And all you other people sending more weapons of death. And you sell your religious bullshit? Shove it up your ass. So on to the Trends Journal and the market. So they're booming. The markets are booming. Because the inflation numbers came out. They were 0.1% less than what the street anticipated. And the markets boomed. And they're booming this month. And the boom may keep going because here's the deal. We had forecast that they're going to lower interest rates in 2024 in the run-up to the presidential reality show because they want to keep the people in power in power. The Fed head, Janet Yellen, was a former Fed head. Janet Yellen is now our Treasury Secretary. They're going to lower interest rates. The EU is going to lower interest rates. The ECB, they're going to keep lowering them. So what's going on? Yeah, the markets went up. Hey, did you see where gold went? Oh, yeah. Gold had a nice boom, too. As forecast in your Trends Journal, the lower interest rates go, the deeper the dollar falls, the higher gold prices go. Oh, forget about the information that came out on Friday of Moody's downgrading America's debt. Doesn't mean anything. No. We could keep building more and more debt up. More and more debt. And I want to mention this, too, about this war shit. They don't put anybody out there speaking for peace. The little fucking scumbag clowns on Fox and Friends. They had Netanyahu on. You ready for the headline? America is next if Israel loses war. Netanyahu. America's next? What the fuck do we have to do over there? Oh, we got to get them ISISes. Got to melt them all over the world. Islamic militants will pose a threat to the United States and Europe if Israel loses its current war with Hamas, Netanyahu claims. Netanyahu implored Israel allies for support during a sit-down with Fox News' Sean Hannity, stating, quote, we have to win not only for our sake, but for the sake of the Middle East. Hey, fuck you. Fuck you. And everybody forgets, nobody knows, everybody asks, are the 39 weeks of judicial reform protests. They hated Netanyahu over in Israel. They called it a civil war. But as I say, when all else fails, they take you to war. And he's taking you to war. It goes on. We have to win to protect Israel. We have to win to safeguard the Middle East. The Middle East? You think the Middle East? You think Saudi Arabia gives a fuck about this? Yemen? Qatar? Iraq? Iran? They could care less. We have to win for the sake of the civilized world. Civilized world as you're murdering, slaughtering people in front of everybody's eyes. Civilized. The trend is your friend, and we're giving you everything we can. So again, our forecasts, would I have thought the markets would have gone up this high in November? Nope. Would not have thought that. Again, we said it would go down in September and October. We didn't make a forecast in November because we felt it was up in the air. But we are forecasting they're going to keep lowering interest rates. Gold, silver prices are going to spike. And where we're going on Bitcoin is still bullish. But none of this is going to matter if the World War III continues to heat up. We got maniacs in charge. And again, take a look at this week's cover. Cannot be clearer. Follow your political leader. Do what you're told. You're nothing more than a piece of shit. I want to make this really clear. I was not put on this earth to be led by anybody. I don't lead. I don't want anybody to lead me. If you want to be led, go. We have political freaks telling us what to do. Look what they did with the COVID war. Close down your business. Stand 6 feet apart. Put that mask on when you're in an airplane, but you can take it off when you're eating and drinking. Stupid fucking shit. Making young people not go to school. When the numbers are, it's less or around 2,000 1 to 17-year-olds died in America out of 73 million from COVID. These are political fucking freaks. These are low-life scumbags who do nothing but suck off the public tit. And they forgot 2 words: public servant. Got it? So support us. We're supporting you. Subscribe to the Trends Journal. You get history before it happens. Very simple. You go to trendsjournal.com.
Over the weekend, the Washington Post, the mouthpiece for the CIA, released a crazy story that a Ukrainian colonel now in jail in Kyiv because of somebody dying in a botched effort to get a Russian pilot to defect, the facts in which with which I'm unfamiliar. There he is in the holding cell in a Kyiv courtroom, claims that he was the orchestrator of the demolition of the Nord Stream pipeline. This, of course, is absurd. Cy Hirsch doesn't give it any credibility at all, nor does anybody except those who slavishly follow the CIA. But why would the CIA release this now?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of politics being attached to the Nord Stream pipeline destruction because winter is coming, and nations are once again called upon to reflect that they have insufficient gas supplies, that if there is a cold winter, they're in deep trouble. They're in deep trouble nonetheless because businesses are closing. Germany has another major car parts manufacturer laying off people right now, holiday season, just like everything else, bad time, because they can't afford to stay in business because the energy costs have become prohibitive. Jobs are fleeing Germany, businesses are fleeing Germany, and there is a political problem. And if you're the German government, people are starting to ask the question, why did you let Joe Biden blow it up? Because remember, people have to keep this in mind. Joe Biden stood in the White House back in February of 2022 and told the assembled press right in front of Olaf Scholz that if Russia moves into Ukraine, the Nord Stream pipeline is going to be taken down. That was the president of the United States saying that.
Here it is.
Yeah.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring it into it.
But how will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
It's more. Look, the CIA doesn't care about anybody but the CIA. And Cy Hirsch's story put them and some covert aspects of the Department of Defense in a spotlight they didn't want. And so they ran with a cover story, regardless of the damage it does. They don't care about anything except protecting the CIA. You can bring on Mr. Devine, and he will tell you that's the truth. The CIA takes care of the CIA before it takes care of anything else.
A member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet by the name of Amichai Eliyahu recently gave a radio interview in Israel, which gave the distinct impression that the Netanyahu government has available to it and might consider, I think his phrase was, that's one way to do it, or that's one way, the use of nuclear weapons to degrade, destroy, and demolish Gaza. This may sound like a ridiculous question. You're the world-class UN nuclear inspector. Does Israel have nuclear weapons?
Of course they do. They've admitted having nuclear weapons. They have a policy of deliberate ambiguity, meaning that they officially won't say we have the weapons until they do. For instance, in 2004, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon all but admitted that he put Israel in a class of nuclear weapons states. In 2006, Omer, the other prime minister, came after him, did the same thing, spoke about Israel as a nuclear power. Israel has on occasions brought out their, in the Gulf War, 1991, Israel trotted out the Jericho missile and fired it, a test fire from their launch site into the Mediterranean, the exact range between Israel and Baghdad, letting the Iraqis know that if they fire chemical warheads or biological warheads into Israel, Israel will respond with a nuclear weapon. So Israel has alluded to this, but the whole purpose of deliberate ambiguity is to create unknown, because it's political. And back, we knew Israel was developing a nuclear weapon. We knew from the very beginning. JFK knew, Lyndon Johnson knew, Richard Nixon knew.
Ben Gurion lied to JFK. I mean, that's a historical fact.
Well, he lied, but then he came and told the truth. He said, what he said is, we won't, and then Golda Meir did the same thing. They said, we won't be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. Now, some people say, well, that means they're not going to build them. But when pressed, Golda Meir's people said, no, possession doesn't mean introduce. So they're very clear about that. Possessing a nuclear weapon doesn't mean we've introduced it. It's only introduced when we publicly say it is and have demonstrated it exists. So the Israel concept is they can build nuclear weapons, they can have nuclear weapons, but they haven't introduced them until they've admitted they have them and they're preparing to use them, which is why this minister's statement caused so much problem, because we're at a point right now where Israel is coming close to the conditions under which they may have to acknowledge having nuclear weapons. If Hezbollah gets involved and if Iran gets involved, we're looking at a scenario where Israel could suffer strategic defeat. And the Samson option, which is, of course, the deterrence model under which the Israeli nuclear weapon exists, it doesn't exist as a battlefield support weapon or things like that. It exists if Israel is about to go down, they will take everybody out. That's the whole concept, that they will hit Tehran, they will hit Cairo, they will hit Amman, they will hit Damascus, they'll hit Beirut, they'll hit Ankara, they'll hit anybody they want to, because they're basically saying, this is Samson taking down the temple, man. We're not going to go down alone. If we go down, you all go down. Therefore, we don't go down.
Some detail. The European Parliament and the majority of the member states reached a provisional agreement on the establishment of the European Digital ID, or EID, the first central and fully digital identification system for all Europeans, on Thursday. Conservative lawmakers and cybersecurity experts are sounding the alarms, citing concerns for potential large-scale abuse. We are taking a fundamental step so that citizens can have a unique and secure European digital identity, Nadia Calvino, the Spanish Minister for Economy and Digitalization, representing the European Council Spanish presidency, said. When there are ongoing migrant crises, when there are feelings of broad antipathy towards migrants, a digital ID becomes appealing. It will be one of the ways that a variety of people will be induced into accepting a continent-wide digital ID. Well, otherwise people that shouldn't even be here will be able to have access to. It's going to be for safety. They'll use every single trick. It's because of paedophile. Any imaginable, conceivable notion will be used to legitimize it and normalize it. This process is beginning now. Under the new law, the EU will offer citizens so-called digital wallets on a voluntary basis. At first, what a key phrase. Why don't you have a digital wallet? Is it voluntary? Yes, it is. Now, where is your digital wallet? Oh, I left it at home. Well, then you're going to jail. Which will contain digital versions of their ID cards, driving licenses, diplomas, medical records, and bank account information. These documents will be recognized as means to access online services throughout Europe, and citizens will be able to prove their identity or share electronic documents from their wallets with a click of a button, the legislators hope. So safe, so convenient, so easy. We've already been introduced to ideas, using phones to pay for stuff, train tickets, using phones to make purchases. And of course, convenience is, a thing, it's a factor. But what are you giving up in exchange for that convenience? Where could it go? Remember, we've already had instances where people's bank accounts have been shut down, whether that's the Canadian truckers. We've already had instances where people's movements are monitored and controlled. Is that a capacity that you want to increase without due regulation and legislation? Notice it's taking place as well in a broad climate of censure and legislation to prohibit free speech. Notice that there's been a 180 on the efficacy and value of CBDCs. That initially they were dismissed. Now it's like, oh no, they are a good idea actually, thinking about it, because we could switch people off financially. It's important to consider how these things might be used and whether or not they're going to be accompanied with legislation that meaningfully prevents them from being exploited. Just look at the 702 bill that's being perpetuated in the USA now, which was introduced for counter-terrorism measures, that's never really gone away and is used essentially to spy on American citizens. Critics, however, see the EID as a building block of a coming European digital surveillance state, a way for the EU and any government to hold all of their citizens' personal information and track their every move. That sort of thing already happens. Do you remember when we were all like, oh yes, security cameras are everywhere now? Do you remember that? They didn't used to be CCTV, but it's for your security, it's for your safety, it's normalised. Now that's just the thing that we all live with. Here's the next wave. The agreement was reached just days after 504 privacy and cybersecurity experts from 39 countries signed a joint letter strongly warning about about the pitfalls of the legislation, as it fails to properly respect the right to privacy of citizens and secure online communications. The researchers and academics concluded that instead of protecting personal data, the current text substantially increases the potential for harm, both by rogue actors and government abuse. Curious that that potential would exist. Naturally, the Commission does not plan to stop at EIDs. Another major plan that's currently in the works is the digital euro, Europe's future central bank-issued digital currency, CBDC, currently in early development phase by the European Central Bank. So centralized global organizations collaborating with one another, able to make a set of decisions, usually in response to crisis, global crisis, this being a globalist misadventure that's being undertaken, that slowly legitimize measures that are always about introducing a bit more control. CBDCs, more control. Digital ID, more control. Under the skin, more control. 15-minute cities, more control. Ability to stop people traveling, more control. Lockdowns, curfews, unpersoning people, censoring people, cancellations of people, controlling media, censoring big tech. What do you think all these things have in common? It doesn't seem to stack up, does it, anymore? There are a few questions that need to be looked at. Excess, death, injury. There's a lot of things that are indicators and clues that it's actually about control rather than care. I've said to you before on this channel that control and care does have a crossover in a natural family dynamic. I have to a degree, control my children as part of my care. And that's even on the level of an adult with children. That's a kind of a negotiation and poses moral questions. But it can just about work in anthropologically well understood groups. When you practice this at scale, when you move power away from people, when all the time you use the language of compassion, the nomenclature of kindness and convenience to alienate us from our conditions and essentially grant centralized authority the right to make decisions far, far away from you. And particularly when it's done like, oh, you know, look at this migrant crisis, we have to have digital ID. Let's grant people a universal basic income. But I'm afraid you're going to have to eat your rice. Nicey, nicey, ricey, ricey. How do you like your rice? Embedded in my skin. That's how I like it. So I would say remain alert and vigilant to any measures that centralize authority and control in broad ways, particularly if it's posed as somehow protecting or helping you, but places that power beyond the reach of your personal authority and integrity. Because I don't think these institutions' primary concern is your convenience and safety. I think it's absolute control. But that...
The Peter Schiff Show.
All right, so Wall Street, I think, has it completely wrong in looking at today's inflation data, or at least the government's version of inflation, and thinking that this means that, you know, the new bull market in stocks is here because the Fed is done hiking, and the fact the Fed is going to start cutting, and who knows, we may even get back down to zero. That might be the hope that springs eternal for the market. And one of the other reasons that the hikes are, or that Wall Street thinks the hikes are coming to an end, is that the economy is clearly weakening. So you have a weakening economy, and now, at least as far as Wall Street's concerned, you've got this so-called benign inflation report because it was 1/10 less than expected. Now, of course, it didn't surprise, you know, to the upside. It could have very easily have been worse than expected. So maybe there was a relief rally too, that it wasn't worse than expected. It was better than expected, and we got a rally. But it's wrong to conclude anything from these numbers. Certainly that the Fed is winning the war on inflation. That is a war that it cannot win. And there are, you know, a couple of reasons for that, but one that should be obvious is what happened to the dollar today. The dollar got killed today. Why did it get killed? Because the markets think the Fed is winning the inflation war. And so paradoxically, they don't want dollars. See, the paradox is they wanted dollars when inflation was a problem and the Fed was fighting it. That's when they should have wanted to get rid of dollars. Because by definition, inflation means the dollar is losing its purchasing power. So why would you want to buy something that's losing its purchasing power? That is, you know, the irony of the foreign exchange market. That's how they work now. It doesn't matter about the dollar's purchasing power. What matters is the direction of interest rates, or real rates, or the rates in the U.S. versus the rates someplace else. It was all a function of rates. That's how the traders had programmed, you know, the algorithms. And so as the Fed was fighting inflation, the dollar was going up. But it was the strength of the dollar that was actually doing the Fed's work, because it was the strong dollar that brought down commodity prices, that brought down oil prices. That's what brought down the headline CPI. So the gains that have been made with respect to measuring inflation have been because of the strong dollar. But here's the problem. The minute the Fed claims victory, or even the markets think that the Fed is winning, even before the Fed actually declares mission accomplished, the markets start trading down the dollar. The dollar starts to fall. And as long as the markets think the Fed is winning, the dollar will keep falling. It was when they thought the Fed was losing that they wanted to buy dollars, because that meant the Fed was going to fight harder and have to raise rates. But if the fight is over and the Fed has won, well, then there's no more rate hikes. And the next thing that's going to happen, if the Fed's not hiking, well, then they're going to cut. And then the dollar's going to get killed. And in fact, if the Fed ever came out and ratified what the markets are thinking and actually said mission accomplished, we're done, we now have a bias towards easing, the dollar's going to fall through the floor. The irony of that is now commodity prices are going to take off on the back of a weak dollar. And so now all of the progress that the Fed made that led it to believe it won the inflation war is going to be lost. And it's going to be obvious that maybe they won a small battle, but inflation ends up winning the war. Because the minute, the Fed is winning, they lose, because then the dollar goes down, because there is no way to win this war, because the minute they stop fighting, right, inflation strengthens. So a lot of the inflation that was created before 2020, from QE1, QE2, QE3, QE4, all that stuff, we're just catching up to that. I mean, that's got a long way to go to work its way through the system. In particular, the exodus of the world from their dollars. As the world is selling its US dollar denominated debt, which we know is happening, what is going to happen with all that money? It's going to be spent on goods in the United States, because if our trading partners don't want to save their dollars, well, then they're going to spend those dollars. While they were saving those dollars, they weren't bidding up prices. Now, they were bidding up bond prices as they were taking all their trade surpluses and buying treasuries. They were pushing up bond prices. But now that they're selling those treasuries and pushing down bond prices, they have dollars. What do they do with those dollars? They spend them. Where do you spend dollars? In America. So all the dollars that we shipped abroad now come back, and they bid up domestic prices, and that's going to reflect in the CPI. Let's say you were spending, $2,000 a year on entertainment. You might say, look, I got to cut that back. I'm going to spend $1,000. I'm going to cut my spending in half, right? That would be a spending cut, right? You're in trouble. You're spending too much money, and so you spend less. This is how Washington defines a spending cut. Let's say Washington, Mr. Washington had a family, or he was spending $2,000 on entertainment, and he had to tighten up his belt. He said, I was planning on spending $2,200 on entertainment next year, so I'm going to cut it back, and I'm only going to spend $2,100, and that's a $100 cut, right? Which, of course, it's not a cut. It's still an increase. So, and even the cut itself was tiny, but if you simply reduce the extra spending that you were planning on, you can't call that a cut. I mean, that wouldn't work in the real world with your creditors who are telling you, look, you got to cut back on your spending, and all you're doing is reducing the planned increase in your spending. But we're not even getting that. They're not even talking about doing that. They want to preserve all the spending that they currently have planned without reducing any of the increases, despite the fact that we're, trillions and trillions in debt on these deficits. And we can't even have small cuts at this point. When you're running $2, $3, $4 trillion a year deficits, even actual cuts of $100 billion, $200 billion, $300 billion, $500 billion are too little, too late. We need substantive cuts across the board. Entire agencies and departments need to be eliminated to get decent savings. We got to cut entitlements. Now, people who are getting these checks have got to get smaller checks.
And here's how Samuel Adams put it in an essay as Candidus in the Boston Gazette. This is where the Sons of Liberty generally published. This is October 1771. He said, "The truth is, all might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. In order to have freedom," Samuel Adams tells us, "we need a 1-2 punch. We need people who value freedom. That means they have to understand it. And then they also have to defend it. They also have to know what needs to be done as well. And that is quite a bit of education. And that means for me, the first thing we have to get to is education. It's pretty hard to value freedom and then defend it if you don't even first know what it is and what it's all about. And when we live in the system that we have today, we are propagandized from cradle to grave, basically, not always intentionally by the people who love us because they just want us to get a good education. They thought things were good when we were kids. And unfortunately, the state-run system, even many of the private institutions for children, because they still have to have approval and accreditation through the same system, is teaching people that the solution to our problems is government. Now, in some situations, you don't get it as bad as I did. I mean, my parents, I don't think, would ever have called themselves socialists. In fact, they thought it was evil to be socialist. So I was taught that. But at the same time, almost every scenario, my instinct was, and I believe this is because I went through this government-run and government-approved system in a very socialist area in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that I would basically thought every time there was a problem, government had to come in and fix it, not freedom. Government was never the problem. I even remember the bailouts, not the more recent ones of the people, and then the stimulus checks, or the ones before that of banks. But I remember sometime in the 80s when I was a kid, there were bailouts of airlines. And my first instinct was, well, if the government's paying for it, shouldn't the government just run this? That's because I had no concept, no understanding of what freedom was all about. Benjamin Rush put it this way in 1786, freedom can only exist in the society of knowledge. Without learning, men are incapable of knowing their rights. And I certainly did not learn about freedom. I may have learned some history, but it was primarily dates and battles and wars and things like that, never about the foundational principles of liberty. Benjamin Rush was absolutely correct. You can't have freedom without knowledge. And that's the same thing that Thomas Jefferson said in a letter to Charles Yancey in 1816. He said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. And that brings me to number 2. So on the other hand, it's also pretty hard to value freedom and defend it if you are living in fear, which is a position of weakness. So as long as you're in a position of weakness, well, that's how Jefferson put it at least. Knowledge is power and ignorance is weakness. So if you're living in fear and you put a higher value on the notion that more government is needed to alleviate your fear, you're going to end up with all kinds of loss of liberty. And we've all heard that famous quote from Benjamin Franklin. The original was in 1755. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. They don't deserve either, and they certainly are going to get neither. But Benjamin Franklin was far from alone in this mentality. Here's James Madison in the run-up to the Alien and Sedition Acts. In 1798, in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, he said, perhaps it is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to provisions against danger, real or pretended, from abroad. This is James Madison, the father of the Constitution, recognizing that people will run to government, give up their liberty at home because they're afraid of some foreign danger. And sometimes that foreign danger isn't even real. So Madison is maybe wearing a little bit of a tinfoil hat, and that's what they would tell us today. Oh, fake danger from abroad. Well, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, because the only way we can be truly safe is when we're free. And part of our freedom, of course, is our natural right of self-defense, which is not being exercised even close to the way the founders understood it. So James Madison understood that people gave into fear to give up their liberty. John Adams made the same kind of a point in April of 1776, back when he was one of the good guys, in Thoughts on Government. Fear is the foundation of most governments. You know, if you've heard me talk about this quote before, I always just want to remove the word most. Fear is the foundation of governments. Because certainly if you think about anything, really, you don't just say most, because any government that exists, you're saying, well, we have to do this in order for this reason, because without it, we're going to have this negative result. That is some level of fear, whether rational or irrational. And of course, the crazy increases of power, things like, I don't know, the income tax, the Patriot Act, the National Bank, and things like that. That certainly is a heightened state of fear where people run to government and authorize them more power, and they never, ever give it back. On what I think is number 3, and that is responsibility. And many people don't want to take responsibility for where we are today, the largest government in history. They want to blame a document, for example, saying that the Constitution caused what we have, as if words on paper can cause a government. And of course, if you have bad words on paper that tells the government they can do whatever they want in all cases whatsoever, it's going to do that. But if the people are ignorant of what the text actually means and what it limits, then it's very easy for people to fall in the trap to say, well, the Constitution is bad, the Bill of Rights is a failure, it caused this problem, it's not protecting me, as if you can wrap yourself in a parchment barrier, as James Madison called it, and protect yourself from the most powerful government in history. Here's how Roger Sherman put it in 1787, pointing out that the Anti-Federalists who were making the case for a Bill of Rights, he's like, this isn't really the end of the story. I mean, let's say we get a Bill of Rights. What's that going to do? And here's how he put it. No Bill of Rights ever yet bound the supreme power longer than the honeymoon of a new married couple, unless the rulers were interested in preserving the rights. So, of course, it's important to list these types of things out, to spell out restrictions. But if you're counting on the words on paper to defend themselves, to limit government, to stop people with guns from doing what they're going to do, then you shouldn't be surprised when they break the rules almost constantly. So we have to have more responsibility for our own freedom.
We can finish it here. U.S. Senator challenges Teamsters president to fight during congressional hearing. Now, Jimmy Hoffa, if he were there, he probably would have just had the guy knocked off, right?
Yeah.
But let's watch. We have a clip of that. I cut out the first part. I just want to cut to the chase, cut to the action. But let's show. This is where a member of the United States Senate, Senator Mullen from Oklahoma, challenges head Teamster. Might want to hear phone. Challenges him to a fight, and you can't help but laugh a little. Let's listen to this.
So this is the time, this is a place. You want to run your mouth? We can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here. Okay, that's fine. Perfect. You want to do it now? I'd love to do it right now. Let's stand your butt up then. You stand your butt up. Oh, hold it. Oh, stop it. Is that your solution? No, sit down. Sit down. Okay. You're a United States Senator. Sit down. Okay, sit down, please. All right. Can I respond? Hold it. If we can't, no, I have the mic. I'm sorry. This is what he said. You'll have your time. Okay. Can I respond? Oh, no, you can't. This is a hearing.
Well, it's pretty amazing that this can occur, and when you try to figure out how significant is it? Was there really any big difference about philosophy? Probably not. Well, one's conservative, one's liberal, and one believes in power unions and that sort of thing. But it's still, in their own way, they all believe in the government doing more, than they should be doing. And then you end up, how many people in that audience and how many people in the Congress really are worried about a deficit, which may be a real calamity. We might even have some difficulties in the street. We may have riots and people living in the streets and suffering from this bankruptcy.
If you go to the next clip, our second story, Nikki Haley is an unserious candidate in an unserious country. And this is from Zero Hedge. Nikki Haley takes fire over unconstitutional plan to force all social media users to be verified by name. And let's listen to Nikki explain it in her own words.
When I get into office, the first thing we have to do, social media accounts, social media companies, they have to show America their algorithms. Let us see why they're pushing what they're pushing. The second thing is every person on social media should be verified by their name. That's, first of all, it's a national security threat. When you do that, all of a sudden people have to stand by what they say, and it gets rid of the Russian bots, the Iranian bots, and the Chinese bots. And then you're going to get some civility. When people know their name is next to what they say, and they know their pastor and their family member's going to see it, it's going to help our kids and it's going to help our country.
Sounds like a little intervention that we wouldn't be endorsing. What's so bad about this is she identified some people who are annoying to us, and that's the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and North Korea, but not in the context of our interventionist foreign policy and our empire and our dealing with sanctions, the more complicated thing, because they're acting out in their defense, but she doesn't say that. So what she wants to do, that's what she's justifying under the Constitution to protect freedom of speech. But what she doesn't want to do is point out who's really violating our freedom of speech, and that's our government. She never once. I mean, she said, "Well, this is all justified because it's for national security's sake." If our national security depends on this and allowing our own government and our FBI doing what they're doing, believe me, she's upside down on this, and I'll tell you, she's not going. I think I will state very plainly that if she's the nominee, I'm not going to vote for her.
This is someone I think you recognize, but this is a great 44 seconds. Listen to what Senator Paul has to say.
And our bill would basically make it illegal for the FBI or Department of Homeland Security or the White House or the CDC. It would be illegal for them to meet with anybody in the media, not just internet companies, but anybody in the legacy media as well, or the print media. It would be illegal, and they would be fired if they were found to be meeting to discuss, cajole, compel, coerce, any kind of discussion to limit constitutionally protected speech. And we decided to use the wording constitutionally protected speech because the FBI pushes back and says, well, we talked to them about taking down child pornography. Well, that's against the law, child pornography. It's not constitutionally protected speech. So it's a good way of trying to divide out what the government can and cannot do.
That's pretty good, new law. It's illegal.
I agreed with that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Illegal to meet to talk about how to suppress Americans' First Amendment rights. So hats off again to Senator Paul for a great move.
Yeah, well, I want to read a little bit about the article on Taibbi. And this is about how to pick and choose and what to do. And he says, what you're about to read is correspondence between British political operatives and discuss how to use fake news to destroy opponents while hiding behind a disguise as an operation supposedly fighting fake news. These tactics stand out, and this is what they do. Accusations of bigotry and homophobia. Guilt, you're guilty of that. Used to silence political opponents on the group's left. This is pragmatism for the evil people. Use of guilt by association, narratives to attack the reputation of conservatives and leftists. That bipartisan type thing, that generally doesn't stand up quite like that, but it's true, because both sides are doing it. But this way, both sides are doing the bad stuff. close coordination with dependably incurious mainstream media organization. You know, there's the strategy, and people should be able to draw a better line between when it's good to protect speech and when you have to say there's a limit, and the limit is when the government gets involved and they use it against the people's liberties and against the people's right of free speech. They twist it, they turn it upside down, and generally get away with it.